Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, can I just say, give yourselves a big pat on the back, because here we are in the final session, and we've got probably the best final session audience as a percentage of the total I've ever presented to. So consider yourselves like the Mo Farah of the media audience. You're just kicking out onto the back straight to come in with a commanding lead and gold medal. Well done. As Derek says, I'm Dave Brennan, founder of Media Native, co-founder of Be Insight. And one of our speakers this morning confessed to being a recovering media planner. Well, I'm going to confess to being a recidivist TV evangelist, because across my long and fairly illustrious career, I'm glad Derek didn't mention the non-illustrious parts of it, I've worked for a whole range of media, but mainly television, and particularly I was part of the ThinkBox launch team. So right from the early days of ThinkBox, I was very heavily involved in identifying TV's value and communicating it to the industry at large. And I've also written a book called TV's Not Dead, which was true when I wrote it in 2012, and thank God, 5 years later, it's still true. And in fact, I'm going to make my one prediction today. I've learned over the years, don't make too many predictions, because some of them might come back to bite you. But my one prediction is, after everything I've heard in this conference, is this, which is there will be a future of television, and consequently there will be a future of TV advertising forum in 2018. So I hope you're all ready to book your tickets straight away. And the reason for that is that actually, if you plot TV's journey, certainly over the 6 years or so that I've been attending these conferences, we've seen some, I think fairly significant changes in sentiment, especially amongst advertisers. And I think there are two reasons for that. The first is it's actually a connection with, if we're all in the digital world, which we are, until recently we were teenagers, and now we're coming out of those difficult teenage years. But as a father of a teenage son, I know that most teenagers tend to be very binary in their views. Things are either right or wrong. They're either good or bad. They're either fair or, in most cases, unfair. And I think teenagers tend to see the world like that. As we get older and more mature, we actually become much more subtle and much more nuanced, and realize actually the world isn't binary at all. It's a much more holistic view. And coupled with that, I think over those years, what we're seeing is a lot more data and insight, things like econometrics, attribution modeling, neuroscience, a whole bunch of insights which allow us to get a better sense of the real value that TV brings to the mix. And that's what we're going to explore today. How significant is that value, and how does it hold up against other media? How can we prove it? How do the new metrics help us perhaps to prove it in more depth and with more insight? And basically, how can we sort the wheat from the chaff? There's a great quote from Arianna Huffington where she says, in today's world, we're drowning in intelligence, but starved of wisdom. And the question is, how do we create wisdom from this intelligence? I'm not sure I've got all the answers in this session. What I do have is a great lineup of speakers and panel members who will impart far more wisdom than probably I could. So I'm looking forward to both introducing them and to listening to what they have to say. And I'm going to start with the first of those speakers, which is Simon Thomas. Simon is somebody I've known for a very, very long time. And I love being able to introduce Simon at conferences, because he's one of the few people I know that's actually been in this industry longer than I have. And one of his first media sales jobs, this will only apply to the people in the UK probably, one of his first media sales jobs was selling a magazine called Punch magazine, which immediately dates both him and I. But Simon is Global Director of Audiences for GroupM, an incredibly important job. And as a result, he spent a lot of time looking at the metrics we use to define and prove value. And so I'm going to ask Simon to come up on stage and tell us all about it. Simon Thomas.
Good afternoon. I hope you've all had a good lunch. First shout out is to Tim Hussain. And so what I need to say to you guys now is, as they say in Parliament, I refer you to the answer my honourable friend gave earlier. Because I think Tim and I actually, GroupM and Ubiquity, are aligned very much in a lot he said. Particularly of interest for me was the fact that I became what was called a researcher. We then transitioned into becoming not data scientists, but we went through business science. And at that stage, I got involved in a lot of econometric modelling with what is now called game theory, another WPP company. So econometric modelling is nothing new. It's been around for quite a long time. After that, I became what was called a gorilla with a calculator. That was in the days where we came out of full service agencies and became media independents in the 1990s. Basically everything was about price. And contrary to rumours this morning, it isn't all about price anymore. It may well be where an advertiser has a very strong procurement department, but it isn't always about price. I've also taken out some of my slides, which you'll be pleased to hear. The goalkeeper's gone. The Churchillian quote has gone, but the iceberg and the fruits are still there. Interesting, the themes are actually very similar to a lot of the very good speakers we've had this morning and yesterday. So, I think we lost something during the digital transformation. We lost something called messaging. As has been said by other speakers this morning, the brands are communicating with consumers. It is a message. It's about quality. It's information about the brand. It's maybe triggering some action, but it's messaging. It's not all about the mechanics. The mechanics now, and again, as alluded to this morning, sometimes might take quite a few cents out of the dollar in terms of the media budget, particularly in the digital world. It did in TV as well. I mean, I can remember some budgets coming through for quite significant seven-figure funds to shoot TV commercials. Had to be in Barbados because you have to have the right blend of sea blue and sky blue, of course. But the industry really needs to get its head together, and I think we have a deficiency in terms of overemphasis on mechanics and not enough on the messaging. But that brand exposure to the consumer is just the start of the journey. And so one of the questions I ask myself is in terms of value, has the creative kept up with the media fragmentation in our marketplace? Has it kept up with the technology available to us? Are we using it as much or as quickly as we should be? And things like dynamic ad insertion come to mind. And also the fragmentation of consumer touchpoints. That's all a little bit of a separate topic and not what I'm going to cover today. So let me focus in on ROI and the value of audiovisual, or total video, or total viewing, whichever way we want to call it, what we might call the truth. There's a key advertiser set of requirements. That's their business and marketing, and that is business and brand objectives. What are the business objectives? What are the brand objectives? Again, we've heard today that the CMO has to go into the boardroom with the CEO, the COO, and the CFO, all the C-suite. And it's commercial, hard numbers. Also, we as agencies are under pressure year after year from retained clients to deliver more, whatever that more may be, and I'll come on to that shortly, with the same investment level. Also, they require optimization of performance against their key performance indicators. Within GroupM agencies, there's probably about 400 KPIs, I think, in total. Some of them are called different things, but roughly about 400 spread across the major clients. So that's P&G, Unilever, Colgate, Vodafone, and so on. And can we actually optimize performance on those KPIs? And many of those may be short-term, and we'll come back to short-term and long-term in a minute, or on more traditional brand metrics in terms of recall, awareness, purchase intent, etc. Or can we do both? Should we be trying to do both? And one of the things that this conference, I think, has shown us is from the quality of the advertisers that were here, some of which are our clients, some of which aren't. But I think all of them spoke very well to the actual commercial business challenges that face them. And then the client, as we heard from some of those advertisers that were here this morning, have their own scenario planning and predictive modeling. Once we move to the media side, we're talking about a comms plan and a media mix. We're looking to get appropriate KPI feed through from the advertiser. And it may well be that they are contractual KPIs. And increasingly, the days that I remember back in the early 90s where we worked for 15% commission, they're long gone. We work on performance in many, many cases. And with some clients, yes, we are working on outcomes. That's already happening in the market. One of the key things, though, I think that's been talked about by a few people over the last day or so is the fact of cross-media influences. And they've existed for many years. I can remember doing Telmar runs, again, back in the 90s, with TV, print, out-of-home, and movies, or outdoor and cinema for the UK people here. Actually optimizing against those particular media with GRPs, opportunities to see, and some form of weighting in terms of the effectiveness, although we didn't call it that in those days, of those media vehicles. So again, that's nothing new, and we've not done enough of it. I think one of the key and probably the biggest agenda item I hear from my clients across GroupM is why on earth can you not measure and before that plan against audio visual, total video, total viewing, whatever we want to call it. Why are the TV and online video markets still in silos? And that's a big challenge to our industry. And we allocate those budgets across those channels, and that allocation is done using econometric modeling, using parameters for categories, for competitive situations, etc. And then as we go through and deliver those campaigns, we use predictive analytics and optimization. Hence my shout out to Tim, who's told you an awful lot more about that this morning. I actually don't need to cover all of that now. But remember that in all of this, particularly at that bottom one, predictive analytics and optimization, it's different clients, different advertisers in different categories with variable budgets, different pricing points, different competitive sets, different distribution. It's a very, very complex environment. And probably now the popular thing to talk about is also the stages in the consumer's purchase pathway. Are they active in the market or are they passive in the market? If they're passive, how do we turn them into active? How do we get them to the point of purchase? What I think the digital world has given us is a fantastic opportunity to take a consumer from a brand exposure to a potential purchase with maybe 2 clicks. And that's a very different world to operate in for advertisers that are working in that environment. So currently, marketeers, advertisers, and agencies, and media vendors, we're working and facing very difficult and complex times. There are political swings and economic challenges. I think we're all very aware of that. We're seeing generally economic power is shifting to Asia. We're seeing digital transformation that has taken place quite quickly. Just think what's changed in the last 5 years. It's significant. And certainly for a baby boomer like me, it's massive change at a very, very fast rate. There's been an awful lot of disruption. There's confusion. For those that follow Gartner, there are hype cycles. And are we down there in the trough of disillusionment? And there's many, many opportunities, and commercial opportunities being the most important ones for my clients, the advertisers. There's millennials with aspirations, perhaps a completely new set of consumers and a very different mindset to my generation of baby boomers. And there's Generation Z or Z coming through, who may be different again. Consumers' expectations, their behaviours, their trends are different. So we need to be very, very clear about these pressures, that the business models are disrupted alongside those political and economic seismic changes. There is a massive battle for consumer attention, and that financial short-termism is making it harder and harder than ever to evidence marketing effectiveness properly. So looking at disruption, with the exception of 3 markets, and this must be true because I've taken this directly from a speech Sir Martin Sorrell recently gave, always a good career move, quote the boss. With the exception of the UK, Argentina and India, it is tough going in the whole global marketing services market worldwide. The UK market's actually been, funnily enough, performing quite well. Far better than many other geographies. Nothing to do with Brexit, but it's because UK advertisers primarily are reducing their capital investment amounts, their fixed investment. And they've switched that spending into advertising to sell off their goods and services. So instead of investing in new factories, R&D, technologies, they're investing in selling more of what they've already got. That's a commercial business decision they've made. And that means businesses are making these short-term decisions. They're not making their numbers. What do? Cut headcount, rather than reskilling their workforces. So they could be investing in their people and tech. Certainly in the UK and in India, that's now stopped. The unintended consequence of all of this is that as they cut back on that investment, it means that as we get increased disruption in future, those businesses are likely to be ill-equipped to deal with that disruption. Just think of what Amazon are doing, and as a major disruptor in the global marketplace, they have invested $16.1 billion in R&D, entering new markets and disrupting more and more supply chains. That's the world we live in. Also, there are some that believe marketing budgets are a cost, not an investment, particularly where we may have procurement-led advertiser clients. That's a very difficult discussion, and that does force price down. And that was, again, was talked about this morning. I'm not going to repeat those comments. But where that's happening, it's not necessarily seen as an investment with an ROI. That reality creates a lot of the short-term thinking we're facing. And there are some of the new challenges. I'm just going to mention 3 of them: fake news, brand safety, and fraud. Again, discussed in far more detail this morning. The technology companies have immense power and global share of this ad market, and they need to take more responsibility. I have seen quite significant shifts from both Google and Facebook in the last 12 months. I'm encouraged, and I encourage them to continue those conversations. Or, for those of us in the EU, including the UK still, for now, we will find that regulatory changes will force change over time. I happen to sit on the EACA Media Council, and I've actually been at meetings in Brussels with the European Commission. And the indications are that action is coming. And I'm not just talking about GDPR and e-privacy or even the audiovisual legislation. They are looking at global technology companies and potential anti-competitive action. And traditional and many new types of media mean that they are all fighting for consumers' attention spans, which are lower. I think Microsoft actually said that they were as low as a goldfish now, about 8 seconds. And that's for conscious attention, so that's prompt actions, but it's also for unconscious attention. And as consumers, we need to find out how they react. Just to build on that, Consumers get 5,000 messages a day. They stack in terms of 67% of us are stacking our media, i.e. multitasking. And only 19% of Facebook impressions convert to a 3-second view, let alone anything else. Effectiveness does indeed depend whether you look at it on short-term or long-term. I've just alluded to the fact there may be too much short-termism, and what value should we give on the long-term brand building? Well, those brands that aren't doing it are only going to find out in 5 to 8 to 10 years' time. This graph is taken from an excellent paper by Binnett and Field done for the IPA, the Institute of Practitioners of Advertising, the agency's trade body here in the UK. There is a massive amount on effectiveness on their website. I encourage you to read it. And indeed, how this works will depend advertiser by advertiser, brand by brand, media channel by media channel, country by country, and even vendor by vendor. But we need to look at what ROI evaluation means across the planning cycle, and then look at what currencies we might use for trading the media touch points. Yes, the iceberg appears. This research was talked about earlier, and in fact, Tim showed another chart from exactly that same presentation. The website is there. You can look at the whole presentation and indeed videos of the presentations given by Ubiquity and game theory. The key thing is, it's a very, very simple conclusion against robust, methodologically sound research. We need to maintain brand values in terms of a long-term multiplier. And the evidence Tim showed this morning was that the long-term multiplier effect of television is much, much higher than the other media. When we measure communication channels, we have 4 main areas we look at. We have campaign metrics. So what did the brand do? What reach did it get at what frequency level? How many GRPs? What was the station share? What was the day part shares? What were the program shares? What was the cost? What was the average cost against the buying audience? Convert that back on affinity to the target audience, which could potentially be a far more behavioral one by using MRI or TGI data, etc. So actual metrics there. Attitudinal metrics in terms of what consumers think and feel, and the behavioral metrics, what they actually do, is the consumer insight that helps do that first stage. And then finally, the key ones, the transactional metrics, that's hard evidence of business results. And in our case, certainly in the UK and Germany, and increasingly in other countries around the world, we are audited by Ubiquity, by Accenture, PwC, a whole range of auditors. We are accountable for every dollar, pound, buck, yen, whatever spent. And what we have to do is make sure those transactional metrics show the client that we are moving the needle, because that's what the CMO and the marketing brand managers require from us. But as well as absolutes on individual media channels, we've got to make sure we identify the halos, the synergies, and the cross-media effects, and potentially negative trade-offs by using multiple media channels. And also we need to look at a risk management process. Again, Tim mentioned this earlier. Take some risks and test and learn. Manage the risk, of course, but test and learn. David, I'm aware I'm over time and I should shortly be finishing. So the key things are to look at those 2 front and end set of metrics. So, currencies, apples, pears, and the banana skin. I mean, this is the problem we've got, and it needs fixing, and it needs fixing soon. There are established measurement and trading currencies. There are TV panels. There are some very good census data sets. There are also some very poor TV panels with not enough sample size in them around the world. There are also some dreadful census return path data sets. Just because somebody's got a lot of big data doesn't mean it's good. Just because a data scientist has interrogated it, maybe even an AI application algorithm's been added to it, doesn't make it any good. We've actually got to make sure we investigate and prove these methodologies and the robustness of the data. TV has those established currencies. New entrants, of course, have new data, new measurement, and potentially new trading currencies. And that's absolutely fine. And we as media agencies, and I don't just speak for GroupM, I know the same for OMD and Aegis and Publicis Group and Havas and IPG. All of us welcome the opportunity to trade, to get value for our clients. So, ROI and the value of audio-visual, or television, or total view, or total video, the truth, so-called truth. We're on a very, very long and winding road. My worry is that we're not even on the same road as some of the players in the marketplace. And do we really know where we're going? Well, with thanks to Justin and Derek for putting this conference on, I think maybe we've got some ideas and we've got some maps of what we might want to do, but I think we need to have a lot more agreement as to where we actually are going. Thank you.
Got the questions? Yeah. We'll just take one or two questions because I know we're already battling against Father Time. But does anybody in the audience have a pressing question for Simon? Some big statements there. I'm
assuming Jeff's gone, has he?
Any questions? Right in the front there.
Well, not a question, but a statement. Simon, excellent pitch.
I'd expect nothing more, Mark.
I think I can speak for the entire crowd. We would have wished to see the Winston Churchill slide, especially with, yeah, exactly. Especially with all the challenges with leadership around the world. But excellent pitch. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
I'll just ask one question because it's the papers I've seen in this conference so far, it's kind of felt a little bit like the elephant in the room sometimes, and that's procurement. Because when we talk about value, that should be, of course, central to what procurement does. But the question I have for Simon is, how can we change this focus from price to value?
Firstly, I'm not actually authorised to discuss that. My personal view, and this is not a GroupM view at all, my personal view is it's a function of the market we're in that there are some companies, and I've sat with their procurement departments, and I fully buy into what they're doing. In the 1990s, I was doing exactly the same. I was forcing price to the lowest possible level in terms of buying media in the UK. So if ITV wanted a higher share of revenue, of the budget compared to their audience delivery, then I wanted something back, and that meant the CPM or CPT in the UK would go down. Simple as that. Or I'd want added value. And that is where we're at, I'm afraid, with some advertisers in terms of their procurement. There is one I'm thinking of who is a global CPG company who have moved quite a long way from pure procurement in the last couple of years to a more effectiveness-based approach in terms of measuring value. However, it's still the balance is still on procurement. Procurement is seen in a lot of companies as crucial because the board see advertising spend, and again, I think Ben from Diageo quite rightly said it's probably one of their biggest line items on their P&L. And the CFO and the CEO, if they want to do something about share price or they want to do a quick fix to get sales up, they'll go short term, but they'll also get rid of all discretionary spending. So, not a very good answer, David, but that's all you're going to get today.
Okay. Thanks very much, Simon Thomas.